Hello, friends. Apollo 13 was supposed to land on the moon, but a critical failure changed everything. How did they survive despite the odds? Let's look at the incredible true story behind NASA's most famous rescue mission. On April 11, 1970, a rocket launched for the Apollo 13 mission from the Kennedy Space Center in America. 3 astronauts were on board, heading to the moon. The interesting thing was that it hadn't even been a year since Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon. This was NASA's third mission to send humans to the moon. Given the success of the previous 2 missions, the astronauts in this rocket were confident in their mission and dream. Their dream was to walk on the moon. However, at the time they were unaware that their dream would never come true. In April 1970, when their spacecraft was approximately 330,000 kilometers from Earth, they heard a loud bang. A massive bang shook the entire spacecraft. Within a few seconds, the warning lights and alarms go off. Loudly. It was discovered that one of the oxygen tanks had burst. The other oxygen tank was leaking rapidly. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." "This is Houston. Say again, please." "Houston, we have a problem." The mission control team on the ground couldn't believe it. They suspected that the instruments were malfunctioning. However, the astronauts in the spacecraft could see through the window that air was leaking. On the other hand, they noticed that as a result of the blast, the spacecraft has shifted so far from its path that it is now traveling kilometers away from Earth every second. Within a few hours, the astronauts on Apollo 13 were so far away from Earth that they set a new record. To date, no human has traveled as far from Earth as these 3 astronauts did during the Apollo 13 mission. Forget about landing on the moon. The question back then was whether they could return to Earth alive. This is the harrowing story of Apollo 13. Carbon dioxide levels in the module are increasing. The crew was starting to suffer. It was a dire situation. It was an extremely serious emergency. In 1961, American President John F. Kennedy promised the world that by the end of the decade, humans would be on the moon. Achieving the goal before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. This promise should be considered within the context of the Cold War. At the time, America and the Soviet Union were in a race, a space race. Who will emerge as the technological leader? In 1969, both the Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 missions were successful. Astronauts not only walked on the moon, but also returned safely to Earth. Kennedy's promise was fulfilled. However, it had the unintended consequence of significantly decreasing public and government interest in spending money on space. It's clear that people were thrilled to see a man walk on the moon for the first time. However, people cannot be this excited for the second, third, and fourth times. The interest in the moon is fading fast. People believed that Apollo 13 would just be another routine flight. Because of this, the American government reduced NASA's budget. Many future missions planned for the coming years, such as Apollo 20, were canceled. That is why the Apollo 13 mission occurred at a critical point in space exploration history. NASA had to prove to the American government that space exploration was still worthwhile. That is why Apollo 13's primary mission objective was not only to inspect and survey the moon's soil, but also to develop human capabilities for working in the lunar environment. The primary mission goal of Apollo 13 was scientific exploration of the moon. We hope to learn a lot about the moon's origins and, by extension, the origins of our own planet Earth. The design of Apollo 13's spacecraft was similar to that of previous missions. There were 4 major components: the command module, the service module, the lunar module, and the launch escape system. The spacecraft was launched aboard a Saturn V rocket. All 3 astronauts were seated in the command module, the spacecraft's main structure. However, it was only a small part. The command module is simply a cone shape measuring 11 feet in length and 13 feet in diameter. This command module contained all of the instrument panels, navigation gear, radios, life support systems, and small engines. The second most important part was the service module, which contained the majority of the astronauts' oxygen. It had more engines and fuel cells to generate electricity. The Command and Service Module is often referred to as the Command and Service Module, or CSM for short. They remain connected throughout the mission until the astronauts return to Earth. They are not separated until they re-enter Earth. The third component was the Lunar Module, which was intended to land on the Moon. And once the work on the Moon was completed, it was supposed to be reattached to the CSM module. The fourth component, the Launch Escape System, was not as critical to the mission. Its sole purpose was to keep the astronauts safe from an accident during the launch. It works like this. If there is an accident during the rocket launch and the rocket catches fire, the astronauts are safely ejected and transported away from the scene. This video shows where the abort system was being tested. However, if the launch goes smoothly, the LES is not required and is ejected and discarded. On April 11, 1970, the LES was no longer required because Apollo 13 had launched safely and successfully. 3 astronauts were aboard the spacecraft: Commander Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, the Lunar Module pilot, and Jack Swigert, the Command Module pilot. Coincidentally, none of these 3 were chosen for this mission under the original plans. Originally, 3 different astronauts were selected for this mission. However, due to various issues, they were unable to participate in this mission. As a result, the crew of 3 astronauts takes off from Earth. Around 200,000 people gathered on the ground to watch the rocket launch. This was a small number compared to the Apollo 11 launch the previous year. There were 7 million spectators for the rocket launch. NASA once again realized how quickly people lost interest in space exploration. However, in terms of mission, this spacecraft flew smoothly to its destination. It was supposed to take them 3 days to reach the Fra Mauro crater on the Moon. This is a large hole on the lunar surface, a crater, which is thought to contain a wealth of information not only about the Moon but also about Earth. The most serious issue during the first 2 days of the flight was when astronaut Jack Swigert realized he had forgotten to file his income tax return. He asked Mission Control on Earth if he could get an extension. He received a humorous response stating that he could get a 60-day extension. This conversation proves that everything was going well. The mission ran smoothly for the first 2 days. At 46 hours and 43 minutes into the mission, the capsule communicator on duty reported that the spacecraft was in good condition and that they were bored sitting there. This is Apollo Control at 46 hours, 43 minutes. The spacecraft raft is in really good shape as far as we're concerned, Jim. We're bored to tears down here. People were becoming bored because everything was running so smoothly. By the way, you may find it strange to hear this, but intentionally allowing yourself to become bored is a good habit in my opinion. I believe that if you want to maximize your productivity and creativity, you should set aside some time during the day. A period of inactivity during which you become bored. This is especially important for relaxing the mind in today's world. If a person becomes bored for 5 seconds, he begins scrolling through his smartphone. This is the big secret behind how I manage my time so efficiently and consistently provide you with so many videos. And this is while continuously traveling. I've shared many more such secrets and practical tips in my time management course, a course that teaches you step by step how to make more time for the important things in your life while increasing your productivity and creativity. Those who have taken this course so far have enjoyed it greatly. You can see the reviews on the screen. If you are also interested, there is a special discount for the first 400 people. 42% off if you use the coupon code NASA42. You can access the link to this course by scanning the QR code, or you can find it in the description and pinned comment. If you are ready for a significant change in your life, then try it. Now let's get back to the point. On the 3rd day of the mission, April 13th, the crew is informed that they must conduct some tests on the lunar module. Aside from that, they must conduct a television broadcast in which they use cameras to show the world the interiors of the command and service modules. The audience's interest was so low that no television network aired this broadcast at the time. Commander Lovell's wife went to the VIP area of Mission Control to watch the broadcast. About 6.5 minutes after the TV broadcast ended, flight controllers on the ground instructed astronaut Swigert to check the oxygen level. There was nothing unusual about this. It was simply a routine check of the oxygen tanks in the service module. And as this check was being completed, a massive explosion occurred. Numerous warning lights and alarms went off. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the astronauts in the spacecraft were mostly in shock. Commander Lovell called Mission Control and said, "Houston, we've had a problem." It turned out that one oxygen tank was completely empty, while the other tank's oxygen level was rapidly decreasing. Mission Control on the ground initially assumed that the instruments were displaying incorrect data, which turned out to be correct. Everyone needed to act quickly if they wanted to save the lives of these astronauts. The TV channels that had previously dismissed this mission as boring and refused to show it on the news have now made it the top story. Apollo 13 to the moon is in serious jeopardy this morning, and it is not going to make a moon landing. The oxygen tanks on the spacecraft were sphere-shaped. These contained liquid oxygen. There was a heater in the center that turned the liquid oxygen into gas. On Apollo 13, the service module contained 2 such tanks. The second tank was originally installed on Apollo 10, but it was removed for modification. It resulted in a minor accident. It fell down while being repaired and was damaged. The tube inside was damaged, but nobody noticed it during the inspection. During testing, people noticed that the tank was not completely empty. To remove any remaining oxygen, heaters were used to boil it completely. Later, it was discovered that the thermometer inside could register a maximum temperature of 30 degrees Celsius. However, when the heater was used to heat the oxygen in the tank, the temperature reached up to 538 degrees Celsius. Nobody noticed the extreme heating because it did not register on the thermometer. Because of the extreme heat, the insulation of the tank's electrical wires was damaged. Prior to the mission, NASA managers and engineers approved the tank after conducting a thorough investigation, but they were unable to see the internal damage. As a result, during the Apollo 13 mission, during the 3rd day's routine tank check, there was a spark caused by those electric wires, and the tank exploded. Only by chance was the tank attached to the spacecraft's exterior. If it had been attached inside the spacecraft and exploded, all of the astronauts would have died instantly. However, because it was on the outside, the explosion occurred there. Only one 13-foot panel was damaged in the service module. What other damage did the spacecraft sustain? The astronauts were not so confident. Everyone had to make an important decision. Which route could they take to return to Earth? The most efficient way to return to Earth was to rotate the spacecraft. However, in order to accomplish this, the service module's main engine had to be started. The CSM module's main engine was located near the blast. Nobody knew if the engine was damaged or not. The second way to return to Earth was to circle the moon and return to Earth. This would eliminate the need for the service module's engine. However, there was a risk that it would take 4 to 5 days to return to Earth. Did the astronauts have enough oxygen and water left? NASA's flight director chose the second option. Take the long way back. The astronauts were instructed to shut down the CSM module immediately. When they returned, they were instructed to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. Though this was a safe decision, it did have a few drawbacks. The lunar module was designed to accommodate only 2 astronauts for approximately 20 hours. Because, as I previously stated, its original purpose was to land on the moon and reconnect with the CSM module. However, these 3 people were expected to spend 4 to 5 days in the lunar module. The lunar module's engines were not designed to fire repeatedly. This was largely a risky maneuver. To conserve supplies and energy, the astronauts were instructed to turn off all non-essential systems in the spacecraft, including the heaters that had been installed. Saving electricity was extremely important. According to this plan, the astronauts sat in the lunar module, and for the first time, the engines were fired. A burn is what happens when an engine starts. So they perform the first buburno and embark on the new path. They made it to the opposite side of the moon thanks to this burn, the far side of the moon. They became the world's first humans to travel this far away from Earth. This record is still unbeatable today. At their furthest point, they were 400,000 kilometers from Earth. If they continued on this path, they would reach Earth approximately 153 hours after launch. However, this time margin was extremely risky. If they arrived on Earth after such a long time, the astronauts would only have 1 hour of extra food, water, and oxygen. The NASA team on the ground believed that the margin was extremely narrow. That is why the astronauts were instructed to fire the lunar module engine for the second time. The engineers in mission control had performed numerous calculations to determine whether the lunar module engine could handle the second burn or not. These calculations were correct. After the second burn, the flight time was reduced from 153 hours to 143 hours, a survival margin of 11 hours. Before the astronauts could relax, another issue arose: the high concentration of CO2. In addition to oxygen tanks, spaceships contain lithium hydroxide canisters for the removal of CO2. When astronauts inhale oxygen, they exhale CO2. If the carbon dioxide is not removed, it will produce a large amount of carbon dioxide, which can be problematic. That is why canisters of lithium hydroxide are used, allowing carbon dioxide to react with it and form lithium carbonate. The problem was that the lunar module's lithium hydroxide canisters were only enough to keep 2 people alive for 2 days. However, there were 3 people who wanted to survive for 4 days. The command module also contained some canisters, which was a plus. However, their filters were square, while those in the lunar module were circular. The experts on the ground had 24 hours to resolve this issue. Astronauts from the spacecraft communicated to inform them of everything happening around them. Plastic bags, cardboard, some suit hoses, and duct tape. They wanted to create something that could solve the problem. After a few hours of experimentation, they devise a mechanism to make this work. Following step-by-step instructions, a new device was created using the materials available, lowering the level of carbon dioxide once more. In his book Lost Moon, Commander Lovell writes that the contraption wasn't very handsome, but it worked. The thing they created looked like this. Throughout the rescue mission, even the smallest details were addressed. Astronauts were instructed not to drink more than 200 milliliters of water per day, because if they drink more water, they'll have to pee. Nate, and in this way, the quantity of their urine. We could change the direction of the spaceship. That's why they had to survive on so little water. The 3 astronauts lost a total of 14 kilograms. Astronaut Hayes develops a urinary tract infection. When Apollo 13 spacecraft returns to Earth after 4 days, the astronauts realize they must burn again. The cooling vapor present in the spacecraft had not been factored into their calculations. This caused the spacecraft to deviate from its intended path. Commander Lovell performed another burn of the lunar module, bringing the spacecraft back on track. Fortunately, the spacecraft could withstand a third burn, even though this lunar module was only meant to withstand 1 burn. The entire world was holding their breath and watching the news channels, and we were waiting for the astronauts to return to Earth. The astronauts' families and friends were watching this on television together. The biggest question was whether this broken spacecraft would be able to withstand the heat impact when it enters the Earth's atmosphere. Will the astronauts survive? Because only the command module was designed for re-entry on Earth, the astronauts had to return to it for this task. When the command module entered the Earth's atmosphere, there was a communication blackout. This was normal because ionization of the air blocks radio waves, preventing communication between NASA employees on the ground and astronauts in the spacecraft. Usually, this communication blackout lasts 2 to 3 minutes. The communication blackout was expected to last no more than 3 minutes. 3 minutes had passed, but there was no response from the other side. 10 seconds pass, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Even after 4 minutes, the spacecraft did not communicate. Could the astronauts survive? 4 minutes and 27 seconds later, communication was established from the other side. People watching it on TV could finally breathe again. All 3 astronauts survived. The parachute was deployed in the command module and slowly dropped into the Pacific Ocean. Teamwork was required. Good leadership. Initiative to think outside the box. How do we fix problems when they arise? These are the 3 things that were absolutely required. The 3 astronauts returned home safely. Although the mission failed, none of the 3 astronauts landed on the moon. Nonetheless, the Apollo 13 mission left an indelible mark on history, showing the historical rescue mission of Apollo 13 and the astronauts' bravery. It has been the subject of numerous books and films. Following the investigation of this incident, NASA implemented a number of safety measures so that such accidents do not occur during future missions. After Apollo 13, Apollo 14, Apollo 15, Apollo 16, and Apollo 17, all of the missions were successful. Apollo 17 was the final mission of NASA's Apollo program, launched on December 7, 1972. During this mission, the astronauts spent 3 days on the moon's surface. This was the last time humans went to the moon until today.